You had the chance, you wasted it. You turned your back when it was time to stay. You fell silent when the other side just needed presence. Now you watch from afar. You notice that something has changed, but it's too late. The fall was hard, but it served a purpose. The pain taught you. The absence shaped you more than any words could. Today, the one who was once left on the ground walks without looking back, without needing to prove anything, without carrying grudges, only awareness. It wasn't luck. It was a scar. It was every abandonment turning into strength. And now, it's impossible to pretend that nothing happened. What was left behind hasn't forgotten. It just learned. You had the opportunity. It was there, available, present, open access. But you chose the game, the doubt, the inflated ego of someone who never believed that absence would have consequences. You ignored the look that asked for presence. You underestimated the silence loaded with effort. You played with time, thinking it would always be within reach. Choices were made, and you can't erase the trail they left. What was once insistence is now distance. What once yielded now imposes limits. That space that once waited is now filled with absence, transformed into strength. It didn't happen overnight. There was tiredness. There was heaviness. And even without anyone around, what remained was rebuilt. And the truth is simple. You don't abandon those who once carried everything in silence. Now on this side, the silence is different. It no longer screams for attention. It doesn't beg for a return. It just observes, without expectation, without longing, without debt. Indifference has a bitter taste for those who never learned to value presence. And those who watch from a distance feel it. They notice the shine that didn't exist before. They feel unsettled by the peace that replaced the chaos. Not out of revenge, not out of vanity, but because everything that was taken away has returned in the form of awareness. What was fragile now does not bend. Those who crumbled in silence have learned to rise in silence. Who once hoped to be seen no longer needs to show themselves. Who was put off until later no longer fits in the now. And those who left will now search. But they can't find what they once had. Because the version that existed died along with the last attempts, with the last ignored messages, with the last unfulfilled promises. There's no resentment left, but there's no space either. And when one realizes the absence, there's nothing left to recover. The touch, the tone of voice, the presence that was once constant, all of it is gone. And what exists now is just the memory of what wasn't appreciated. Those who once thought they would be eternal now face the definitive absence, not as a punishment, but because there comes a moment when even hope becomes exhausting. And what remains in such cases is a kind of regret that cannot be explained. The kind that hurts in silence, that consumes from within, that screams in the mind, but has no one left to direct it to. And there's no point in calling out, because there's no one left to answer. The connection was severed the moment effort stopped being reciprocal, the instant one presence became disposable, the point at which absence stopped hurting and turned into relief. And that's frightening, because there's a huge difference between losing someone and being forgotten. Those who were once taken for granted must now deal with the reality. No one is irreplaceable when self-love awakens. There was no warning, but there were signs. Gazes that changed, responses that cooled, gestures that diminished until they disappeared. But those who refuse to see always pretend not to notice, and only understand the gravity when it's too late. The absence that was only a threat one day comes true. And when it does, it doesn't come back. Now it's too late. There's no turning back. What was once pure has been drained dry. Patience has turned to walls. Hope has become the past, and what's left belongs to no one but itself, because once you learn to live without, dependence dissolves, and what was once love becomes a memory that doesn't hurt, but also doesn't repeat. Regret is silent, but consciousness screams. And now those who ignore the past live with the shadow of what they lost. The routine continues, but something is missing. The conversations carry on, but nothing fills the void. Laughter may appear, but it has no roots. New companions distract, but do not embrace, because what was left behind was no ordinary thing. It was presence, dedication, truth. And when that disappears, no replacement can hold up. What was once set aside is now unattainable. Not due to superiority, but because it evolved, because it had to learn through pain what no one taught with words. Now there is clarity, there is strength, and above all, there is an awareness of one's own worth, that worth which no one else has the power to diminish. And that's where the anguish lies, realizing that what was once easy is now impossible, that the one who once waited for a message now expects nothing at all, that the one who used to make space is now an absence, that the one who forgave everything no longer listens to explanations. And it's pointless to rehearse justifications, it's pointless to write long texts, it's pointless to regret in silence, because the one who truly left no longer hears excuses. It's simple. Time was had, but it wasn't used, and time cannot be begged back. It passes, it takes away, it transforms, and sometimes it destroys everything that wasn't cultivated with care. Now on the other side, there is someone who won't return, because they don't need to, because they've already understood they deserved more, and because they no longer fit in breadcrumbs. Those who didn't care now feel the absence, but they have no access anymore. There is no password, there is no way, because when respect dies, everything else dies along with it. And then only emptiness remains, the echo of all that could have been, the silence that now speaks for itself. End, without a final period, without a new beginning, without a return. Those who lost, lost. Those who stayed, stayed, and those who departed became someone else, and that someone else no longer waits for anyone. Because there are losses that don't hurt in the moment. They only hurt when there's nothing left to be done. And that's exactly what eats away inside, the realization that time doesn't come back, that simple gesture will no longer be repeated, that the affection that seemed eternal was finite. Trust wasn't shattered all at once. It was eroded, little by little, in the moments of forgetfulness, in the lack of care, in the absence that became routine. And the cruelest part, this was noticed, but ignored. Today there's a clarity that didn't exist before, and with it comes discomfort. It's no longer about jealousy, pride, or competition. Now it's just regret, cold, silent, useless, because the moment to act differently has passed. The chances were given, and what was ignored became history. The history that now only belongs to one side, the side that moved on, the side that healed, the side that no longer expects a return. And the hardest thing to accept is knowing that no one will see that look again, that unique way of caring, that raw, real, no-strings-attached devotion, that whole presence which now no longer offers itself to anyone, because once someone has been left behind, they learn to protect the little that remains, and that little becomes a shield, becomes a criterion, becomes a demand. And then it becomes impossible to enter again. There may be attempts, there may be words, but there is no more space, because those who truly change don't return. They transform pain into standards, they turn disappointment into silence, and they transform absence into strength. That presence that was once available 24/7 now no longer attends to anyone, not out of anger, but because they learned not to give themselves to those who can't hold on. This isn't coldness, it's maturity. It's knowing that insisting where there has already been a loss is taking a step backward, and those who evolve understand the pain of returning to the place that hurt them and choose not to go back, even if something inside calls, because self-love screams louder than any longing. And when the other realizes, it is devastating. You notice that the stay will no longer be said, that waiting at the gate no longer happens, that concern, even in silence, no longer exists. And then, all that's left is the memory. All that's left is what could have been. All that's left is what was wasted. The problem is that not every absence can be repaired. There are losses that do not accept an apology, not because forgiveness is lacking, but because the connection is gone. The line has been cut. The bridge has fallen. What once was easy access has turned into a closed territory. And the cruelest part of all is watching the other thrive after the abandonment, more calm, more centered, more grounded. With a different shine, that shine that emerges after swallowing a lot of pain. And then comes the painful irony. Those who hurt now desire exactly what they destroyed, but it's no longer there. They will never have it again, because some pain liberates and some absence heals. It was the distance that allowed for reconstruction. It was the lack that taught the value. And it was the silence that provided space to hear what the presence muffled. Now those who experienced all this are no longer satisfied with little. They don't yield easily. They aren't fooled by promises. And that's unsettling. It's unsettling because control has been lost. That assurance that there would always be a return has vanished. The dominion over the feelings of others has evaporated. The subtle manipulation has stopped working. What once was a bond has become a limit. What was affection has turned into learning, and what was a relationship has become a story. Those who underestimated it now choke on their words. They watch from afar. They try to disguise it, but their eyes betray them. The discomfort is palpable, and pride no longer protects. It only prolongs the grieving. Because yes, this is mourning. Mourning for something that is still alive but unreachable, and there's no more confusing pain than losing someone who is still out there, but is no longer here. So accept it. It does no good to search on social media, send indirect messages, or risk a hi. On the other side, there is no longer anyone who expected that. There's another version. Colder perhaps, more demanding for sure, but above all, more lucid. Lucid enough not to fall into the same cycle, not to repeat the mistake, not to diminish oneself to fit into tight spaces. And when lucidity arrives, the game is over. Power shifts hands, strength changes sides. And those who were once disposable are now out of reach, because everything has its limits, and love that isn't nurtured fades away. This is the final point that no one wanted to write, but which became inevitable. The end that was built in the details, in the absence of care, in the routine of disguised neglect. Now it's too late. There are no more excuses that convince. There are no more memories that sustain. There's only what's left behind, and those who are there that won't come back to fetch anyone. It's strange to realize that absence weighs more when you know it was provoked. It wasn't accidental. It wasn't by chance. It was a choice, a slow, negligent recurring. A distancing that began with apathy and ended with the definitive silence of someone who got tired of waiting for change. And now, no matter how much one tries to disguise it, there's a discomfort that won't go away. It's not nostalgia. It's not love. It's guilt dressed as memory. Because everything could have been different, but it wasn't. Now we try to remember the details, the gestures, the words, the scent that lingered in the air, the laughter that came easy without effort, the way the other seemed always available. And along with these memories comes the question that is never spoken out loud. Why didn't I appreciate it while I had it? The answer isn't pretty, because it requires facing one's own ego, complacency, the cruelty disguised as neglect. And not everyone is ready for that. It's easier to say that it was time, that life changed, that things moved on. But that's not true, because some people only move on the outside. Inside, they carry a specific emptiness, a space that no one else occupies, because not just any company can replace genuine presence, and this kind of absence turns into a ghost. It appears in the details, in the longest nights, in shallow conversations with those who know nothing of what has been lived. The mind tries to compensate, the heart doesn't cooperate, because it remembers, not the pain, but the peace that existed before the absence. The surrender that was made without calculations, the love that asked for nothing but reciprocity. But that was refused, trampled, ignored. And now the one who caused all this feels not the pain of loss, but the consequence of their own lack of awareness. The cost of emotional negligence is high. It always has been. But it's only understood when affection fades away, when the other side stops trying, when the eyes that once searched now look away, and the silence once filled with waiting is now just empty. There is no longer space for reconciliation when only one person tried to keep everything standing, and those who didn't recognize the value of presence when it was constant must accept the discomfort of seeing all that flourish elsewhere, Because this is what happens. One day, the one who was discarded finds someone who knows how to care, and nothing is more bitter than watching, from a distance, what could have been be lived with someone else. But this is the consequence for those who act as if no one will ever leave. They believed it was enough to return whenever they wanted, that the other would always be there, waiting with an open heart. That absence would never be taken seriously. But absence became comfortable. It turned into protection. It became relief. And now, returning no longer makes sense, because there is nothing left to seek where everything has already been overcome. What remains is regret, and the worst kind is the one that has no destination. There are no more conversations. There are no more bridges. There is no more presence. All that's left is the weight of what was not said, of what was not done, of what was left to die, out of sheer arrogance. Those who don't care watch from a distance as what they lost flourishes elsewhere. And it doesn't matter how many relationships come after. None will be the same, because when you lose someone real, the standard shifts. The emotional gauge rises, and everyone who comes after seems smaller. Not because the other person is too special, but because no one else delivers with the same truth. No one else tolerates so much, loves so deeply, endures so long. And now, no one else accepts so little. Memory takes care of reminding us there was someone who would do anything, who would be there, who would listen to even the silence, who would embrace even the anger. And that person isn't coming back, because they were wounded too deeply, because they were ignored for too long, because they were alone for too long. And when someone learns to walk alone, they don't want to go back to the place that left them behind. This is the end that no one wants to live, but that is built with small daily decisions. Every unjustified absence, every brusque response, every lack of care, every time pride was chosen, all of this becomes a wall, brick by brick, until affection knocks and finds no entrance anymore. And then, when the realization sinks in, it's too late. If this touched something inside you, comment, like, share, and subscribe. This needs to be said.